Karen,
Yes.
would you like profound peace of mind?
Yes.
Well, how about boundless joy?
Oh, definitely yes.
Well, then I guess then an abundance of success, time, and energy might not be so shabby either.
I will take it all.
Well, today, what do you say we talk about how to find all of that?
Sounds like a great idea.
I agree. So on this episode, we're going to embark on a transformational journey like no other, where we'll learn all about the life-changing magic that comes from just shutting up and sitting. Yep. Today, we're talking about and finding silence as a way to make changes in our life to help us find the peace we want. And we're going to learn all about the power of the primordial sound mantra. Welcome to the Skeptic Metaphysicians.
My name is Will.
And I'm Karen.
And unlike Mulder and Scully,
we both want to believe.
so we've embarked on a journey of discovery.
We've talked to people deeply entrenched in the spiritual and metaphysical world.
We've thrown ourselves into weird and wonderful experiences. I even joined a coven of witches.
And wait, you joined a coven?
Yep, all in the interest of finding something
Anything
that will prove that there's something beyond this physical,
three-dimensional world we all live in.
This is the Skeptic Metaphysicians.
Hey there, I'm Will.
And I'm Karen.
And this week we are blessed to have a transformational lifestyle and leadership coach, Yedda Stansel, with us. Yedda is passionate about developing and delivering programs for individuals and teams that are seeking sanctuary from the hustle and bustle of daily life in order to achieve inner peace, enhance their well-being, and achieve their full potential in all areas of their life. We are thrilled to welcome Yedda to the show. Yedda, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, how are you? It's so good to be here.
No, we are thrilled to have you on. I hope that everything I just said didn't put you on the spot. We're expecting a lot.
Well, I don't know about you all and your listeners, but I'm really hoping she shows up.
All right. Silence, huh?
Yeah, yes.
There's the rub, Will.
Sometimes I wonder if my ex-husband ever listens in on these shows because he would be like, really? Yeah, let's have her talk about silence. I'm the last person on the planet that would ever promote silence if you knew the pre-breakdown Yedda. I mean, the absolute last person. So for all of the listeners out there, there is hope. If you are going, there's no way. I am never, ever going to be someone that practices silence. I actually spoke the exact same words. And now I do not know how I would live my life without the ability to, in my language, shut up and sit and go within and talk about what's going on inside of me before I throw and project that on everybody else.
Okay, so I have a question about silence.
Just one?
Well, I have a plethora, but I'm going to start with one. So when you're talking about silence, do you mean simply speaking or just every kind of silence? Because Will can sit there on the couch and be perfectly quiet while he's, playing games and whatever on his cell phone.
Yeah, so this is a great point. Thank you for bringing that up, Karen. And so there actually have two things I want to say about that. So first of all, between the genders, between male and female, the way our brains are wired. Okay, this is a really important tip here. What happens for us as women, we are like a ball of twine. Everything is connected. We're always thinking and problem solving. And if, the car's getting low on gas, it's already connected to who's going to pick the kids up from school because now I might be late because the da-da-da-da-da. Men have what's called a box system. They pull a box out and they're in a box. And so guys, this is great. Guys have what's called a nothing box. Did you know that, Will, that you have a nothing box where you can literally think about nothing while you're doing something?
I've been told many things, but maybe not. I've been called a nothing box a lot. But.
Yes, so you have the ability to sit and do something and you might be thinking literally about nothing, which maybe feels like silence. So there is a very different way around the processing of the brain. And so, Karen, this is a great point. So it's not just about genders. I'm talking about the silence and stillness of shutting up and going within, closing my eyes and disengaging from all distractions in the outer world. I mean, complete and utter silence. And I would actually add to that, silence for me, also adds an element of stillness. So can you evolve? And silence takes different forms where you're walking and you're in contemplation and you're in prayer. And there's lots of ways of being silent. But my definition of silence for shutting up and sitting is going within and removing all distractions and taking all of that brain power and putting it on self-regulation and checking in with what's going on with my thoughts, my feelings, and then what behaviors am I potentially wanting to then act on based upon how I think and feel.
And how different is that from meditation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's why I wrote my book, because I was really curious about is meditation the same thing as mindfulness? And we use these words interchangeably. So I thought, well, are they? The truth is they're not. And so in meditation, when we go within, and this is what I learned, was in meditation, it has very much of a Hindu philosophy. And so with meditation, what we're trying to do is move up the levels of consciousness up into unity consciousness, which energetically flows this way. And then mindfulness is more about bringing that divine energy back down into and embodying and coming back home to who we are in a physical sense. And that allows us to show up and pay attention on purpose with loving kindness. And so as I was learning all of this, I was like, okay, well, am I meditating, lifting up? Am I mindful, dropping it? What am I doing? And then in meditation, there's hundreds of different forms. And so it got really overwhelming for me. And that's how the language for me, I arrived at shutting up and sitting down. Literally, that's what happened. I went and met with a teacher, and her work, I stole her business name. Her business was Sit with Gina. She was referred to me, and she was my first, I would say, spiritual teacher. When I went to sit with Gina, that's what she did. She said, I sit with people. And I'm like, what does that mean? And I was coming off of years of therapy and years of energy work and integrative health and healing and, all the rocks and, I was like all in on all the metaphysical, like I'm trying everything. It was a smorgasbord buffet of, does this work? Does this work? Does this work? And so when I went in and she said, literally, it was a room, it had 2 chairs and there was a window open and that was it. And when I walk in that room, I just want to just profusely talk about the stories. I want to tell her everything about my life and why this works and why this doesn't work and what I know and what I don't know. And as soon as she could find a pause in my breath, she goes, all really fascinating and quite interesting, but totally irrelevant. Are you ready to sit?
Oh boy. So your entire life in a nutshell wrapped into irrelevance.
Wow.
Yeah. And so then part of me was standing there looking at these 2 chairs and I said, so what do you do? What do you mean sit? And she goes, you come in twice a month for an hour and you sit in this chair across from me and we sit in silence together. Straight in. There was no like, let's try 4 minutes. Let's try 14 minutes. It was an hour. Again, most people who know me don't think of me as the silent type, but I was so curious. And she's like, you sit across from me for an hour, you come in silence, you leave in silence. And I said, so you want me to pay you to sit in that chair right there and do nothing and say nothing and experience nothing and then leave? And she goes, yes. Well, out of sheer craziness, I was like, okay, you know what? I got to try this because I've heard of a lot of crazy stuff and I've done a lot of crazy stuff. The metaphysical world really laughs at me. I've done a lot. I've never just tried shutting up and sitting. And she goes, it's up to you. So I sat and I left and I just kept coming back. Here's what was so intoxicating about this. It was the greatest metaphysical experience I had ever had. Was going inside of me. And I remember I used to have these questions with a lot of these spiritual teachers is, well, how come, source only talks to you? Or how come God only gives you the message? Or how come the angels only are working with you, Will? Why can't they work with me? Why can't I have that? And so as I started doing that, the shutting up and sitting, like magic started happening. I would leave that room and then over the next days and weeks, things would happen. And I didn't have the language then, but I was opening up to serving something greater than myself. So Karen, what you were talking about was, it wasn't like it was a conscious intention. I came back home to me. And while I was going within to cultivate loving kindness, I was also rising up and it just opened something that allowed this amazing thing to start happening. And it was just living this beautiful life of presence. And I thought, this is crazy town. But man, I'm going back.
Well, I've got 2 very important questions. One is, why didn't you just do that at home? Just come and sit at your whole house. It'll be cheaper and you can do the same thing in your house.
Yeah. So you know what? I paid for the accountability because I can tell you one thing. I can sit now in my own home and I do have that discipline, but there's no way in the world. I went for 2 years and sat with her in silence across from her.
When I think of all the time that it entails, I can think of so many things I could do in that amount of time.
Yeah. So, you know what I realized I was doing is I didn't have the discipline back then. And I also didn't have the cognitive patterns and the behaviors and the habits. I mean, I was learning to really clean house on the inside.
Mhm.
I was learning to face old patterns, demons, parts of my ego that hadn't grown up, the parts that were hurting other people. I mean, it was like Willy Wonka land in there. I mean, it was straight up Technicolor. And what I realized was I was developing the habit of two things. One was being able to be with my pain. And the second was identifying how I was creating suffering when I was not able to or didn't want to be with my pain.
Mm.
And that was a habitual pattern that took at least 2 years to even get some traction, to then take another 8 years to keep building upon.
Wow, that is astounding.
Wow.
Saying a lot.
So
Yeah.
were you making eye contact or do you have your eyes closed? I need to know more about the details.
I
Like,
can
what is-
imagine making eye
do you
contact right
talk
now.
about it afterwards or?
We would walk in and sit, and then we would leave. That was it. Now, there were times I would try to sneak it in. I'd be like, hey, did you get your hair cut? Oh my God, I just love that shirt. And there might be just a few brief banterings, but the more we went, the deeper we went in, the more sacred it became. And so it was seductive to go. I would come running. I remember one of the very first sessions we had, I sat down, and the point being of doing this with someone, Will, I sat down and she was literally 6 feet across from me. And so, Karen, I could sit Indian style, close my eyes like this. I could put my feet on the floor. I mean, I could do whatever I wanted.
Mhm.
She would sit across from me with her eyes closed. And there were moments where I would feel this force that almost felt as if it was pushing me backwards out of my chair, and as if I had been kind of pushed onto my back and I was then looking up. The force was so strong. And so I remember learning eventually not to even ask questions, but at one point I did ask her, what is happening? I mean, am I losing my mind? I'm starting to think about like the Force and Yoda and Luke Skywalker. Like I'm like in all like, I don't know what's happening. And we did talk about this one at one point, and she said, that's the power of presence. And that's the power of connecting with this divine consciousness that we are all connected to. She goes, I'm holding space for you and with you. And the power of sitting with somebody when we are in suffering or in deep pain or catharsis or wherever we are was so, I mean, I was tethered to her. I could feel this energy, this spiritual connection to her that was expanding and radiating out from her, that was encompassing and holding me, that was allowing me to wake up and learn how to do that for myself. I could literally physically feel it. And it was wildly intoxicating, incredibly disorienting. And then I would leave and go, I can't wait to go back.
Wow. That's amazing.
In this day and age of ADHD syndromes,
You're looking at one, ADHD, dyslexia. I mean, the list goes on. There are stuff that my brain should not be able to do that it does. The sitting practice, you would have never, and I'm a high school dropout. I left school at 16 because I was like, I can't even sit in classroom. I can't even listen to someone talk for an hour, much less go in and close my eyes for an hour. And I did. And it shocked me. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. And that's why the language I came up with when I started writing my book was shut up and sit. I thought, this is language anybody can get. And I also think too, Will, you mentioned something there about the brain and all of that. I also think in our society, the reason why people are not really excited about silence is because it's a form of punishment. So we use silence to punish people. And for me, the language of shutting up and sitting down was a language of punishment. Shut up, go sit down, get out of here. We're inviting people into is, oh, go within. It's so great in there. It's so loving. It's so kind. And I'm like, no, it's not. Sitting with my nose in the kitchen corner while my siblings are playing and everyone's watching the Disney movie because I did something I wasn't supposed to do. That silence is a form of exclusion, not a way of including me back into my own inner world.
Mhm.
So I think for a lot of us, it is, we think we can't do it physically, but then I think unconsciously we have some patterns where we go, I don't know if I want to do it. I'm actually maybe even activating some old trauma and wounds that are not something I want to touch again. I've built a whole life to get away from that. Why would I go running back into that inferno?
So when you were sitting in silence, did your mind just start throwing up roadblocks at you? Did it just start thinking about 1,000 things all at once? They talk about silencing the mind, but it's not as easy as just that. But when I
Yeah.
sit in silence, I can't not think?
Well, in the beginning, because I was so curious and I was in this safe space and I was kind of like, all right, well, let me see what you got because I can tell you it's not going to work. I kind of was like, I'm just here to prove you wrong and to prove me right. But it was the essence and energy of sitting with someone who was in a space who held the vision for me that I really was and really am, that had this metaphysical power to soften and open me up. And so when I would leave those sessions, I was all in on this. I was Jackson Pollock. I was like, what is meditation? What is mindfulness? How about habits? I was in the seeking of knowledge at a level that I wanted to know, why is this working? How does it work? I want to understand this more. I need to make some sense of it. And so when we're in that space, and I think one thing I came across, and so I'd go learn for 2 weeks and then come back in and sit and go deeper and deeper. Now, mind you, I had my own practice in between on the days I wasn't with Gina. But the power of that moment was so incredible that I would just get these insights. And one that I got, and I never heard this, when we go within, when we shut up and we sit, it's not to stop thinking. You'll never, ever, ever stop the thinking process. But what you will do is you will put your attention on what you're thinking because you're sitting with it. And so as you put your awareness on what you're thinking, whatever you put your awareness on slows down. Now my language is, oh, I'm aware I'm thinking about the light in front of me. Oh, I'm aware I'm thinking about the dog upstairs. I got to where I could be so aware of every thought that I slowed it down to the point that I got to choose the next thought. It didn't choose me.
And then you're actually listening to what you're thinking about.
And I'm now creating what I want to think next versus running on autopilot or a narrative or a script or something that somebody gave me from my childhood that I realized, I don't want that. Yeah, you're being aware of being aware. So right now, as I'm talking to you and Karen, I could pull my awareness back and be aware of the entire experience. So the observer is what awareness is. And so you're right, we are not our thoughts. We have 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day. And 90% of them are a repeat from yesterday if we haven't learned to do the work to go within and become aware of what am I thinking? Think about that for a minute. So we never change our lives or go forward or create anything of value in the manifestation process if we aren't cultivating conscious awareness of what are the thoughts. And they're mental units of energy that have power. So if we didn't, we would just be these glowing blobs on the floor. And that's kind of what led me into the primordial sound was, of all the different things I had tried, I needed to understand what was happening, even though I knew there was magic here. I really just have an insatiable curiosity to go, what happened to me that hour in that chair for 2 years that I could explain and that I couldn't explain?
This is fascinating. You mentioned primordial sounds. When we come back from this short break, we're going to dive into primordial sound meditation because I got a lot to say about it because I've been doing it. Because you were gracious enough to give me one. So we're going to dive into primordial sounds when we come back.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Skeptic Metaphysicians. We are talking to Yedda Stansel, who is a leadership and lifestyle coach. And she's been talking to us about the power of silence, which she calls the most powerful metaphysical modality she's ever tried. And she has tried a lot. So that speaks volumes. Now, right before we left, you dropped a little nugget of information, a little thing called a primordial sound. And I want to dive into that further, deeper, because that's the thing that got my attention when I first started looking at your videos and things like that. Can you give us a quick breakdown of what primordial sound mantra or meditation is?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing we have to talk about, the first thing is, what is a primordial sound? And a primordial sound is not man-made. So it's really easy to identify a primordial sound. A jackhammer is man-made. So that's not a primordial sound. The sound of rain, the sound of frogs at night, the sound of birds singing, that's a primordial sound. So we look at primordial sound. And so the reason why we want to be in a primordial sound is it has a different energetic vibration. And so when we are sitting in a primordial sound space, and I'm sitting, in my room downstairs where I'm doing the interview, when I'm sitting here, I can hear the cars going by, I can hear people talking. I can also hear the sounds of nature. So that's how I want you to think. Is this man-made or is it not man-made? And the reason why primordial sound is so important is it actually raises our vibration. So I was talking earlier about mindfulness and meditation. Mindfulness is embodying, coming back home into the heart space, loving kindness, cultivating that self-awareness. And then the meditation is moving us up through the energetic levels of consciousness to the divine. So I firmly believe we need to do both. And so primordial sound meditation is and it's in Sanskrit, so it's based on the Vedantics. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of years old in the Eastern philosophies. And so when you were born, at the moment you were born, so the exact time, place, latitude, longitude, you plug all that into this Vedantic astrology. And so you get a 3-word mantra that matches this same vibrational kind of energetic pattern of where the universe was, the sound it was making at the exact moment you were born.
Wow.
I mean, like, so, again, having tried lots and lots and lots of different things. And so this one was like, I went out and studied with Deepak Chopra. He personally invited me to come back to go deeper in, to really understand this. Because again, I asked big questions. And so I would ask these questions. So I went, I got my three words, and there are 3 words. Every primordial sound starts with Om and it ends with Namaha. And so this is some really cool stuff. The sound of Om, we all know that in yoga. If we've done yoga, if we've done meditation, everybody knows. And the sound Om actually has 3 parts. Ah, O, M, Ah, Om. And so those 3 sounds are the sound of the divine making itself known in the world. So that's what the Vedantics believe. So it's like to say in the name of God, or if we were Jewish, whatever the different names are, in the Jewish tradition, you used to in the Old Testament, you couldn't even say God's name because it was so powerful of a vibration. So this Om is that same expression. And that middle word is the exact energetic vibration of you when you came into physical form from the spiritual into the physical. And then Namaha is 3 phrases that is the divine coming in, expressing itself as will, making itself known out into the world, but then folding its consciousness back on its expression as will, which is ultimately itself.
Which is
So it's like a big infinity.
You're starting to understand why I love this primordial sound stuff, because it is powerful in so many different levels.
Oh, and so then when I started looking at this kind of like 7 layer of vibrational process that went out and folded back in on itself and came in, and then started studying the 7 chakra systems. And then what I realized, and you've seen in my video, it matches up. So we get this primordial sound. And so I'm sharing what it is, but when you actually get your own mantra, you don't say it out loud ever. You don't share it. It's as sacred as the breath as when you were born. And so in the primordial sound, tradition, if you will, the ritual, you get this in a very sacred ceremony. Your teacher gives it to you once out loud and says it. And then you go in and use that as your mantra in your sitting practice, but you never, ever say it out loud again. It's not meant to be used as anything other than connecting back with the vibration the universe was making at the moment your soul made itself known physically.
Mm-hmm.
Mantra literally in Sanskrit means mind focus. So for people just starting out, having a mantra is a really great idea. Some people though, however, go, well, I'm just going to do the mantra. I love myself. I love myself. I love myself. And what happens when we use a mantra or a language that we already know, man, do we give the ego some fire. And then she's over there going, no, you don't. Do you just know what you did yesterday? How about last night? Let me tell you. And the next thing I know, I've got this dialogue going and I'm like, that doesn't work either. So when, and your ego is a very kind of rudimentary childlike part of yourself. Would you take a 10-year-old, 8-year-old and let it go run and live its life as an adult? No, but most of us do. And so our ego's out there running around. It's out of control. It might even reach a teenage level, but it's just making a mess. It's all about itself. It's so selfish, so self-absorbed. But because it's childlike, what do you do with a child when they're having a temper tantrum or throwing a fit?
Buy them ice cream.
Yeah, buy them ice cream. You distract them. You go, here's a parent. Or they fall and scrape their knee and they're having a total fit. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, look. And then they stop everything and they're like, what? So
I did not expect to be right.
When you, right. When you give your mind, AKA your ego, a mantra, guess what it does? It goes, oh, we're going to put our attention on repeating that phrase. And so the higher self in you gets to come out. And you've now given this mind focus to this infantile, this, juvenile part of yourself and said, hey, can you just sit in the corner for 20 minutes and just focus on saying this mantra over and over again? And then what happens is this other part of us comes out, the true self, the expansive, the expressive, the, connected to everything. And we start to see, oh, there's lots of different selves in here. But if I can give that part a focus, I can open up and I can receive really cool things because now I'm really connected to my soul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what happens. So I'm curious, been doing it. What's the experience been like for you?
So I know I'm not supposed to tell anybody what.
You can't tell. I don't want to know your mantra.
I would not. It sounds kind of like play that funky music by Boy, right? You just kind of along those lines.
Yeah. Well, you get into your rhythm, and you can do it to that. I don't care what rhythm you got, just do it.
Right. And then I was okay, how can I put this? I'm really bad with mantras. I meditate every day or almost every day or try to. And for some reason, when I try to say a mantra, like focus on a mantra, I have a hard time relaxing enough to let things happen. So I wasn't expecting an awful lot. However, first time I did it was exactly what I expected. Nothing. In fact, I think I might have just wasted, 45 minutes or whatever it was I was doing it for. The part that you guide us through was helpful. But then when it came time to, okay, you're on your own here, no training wheels. I found myself having a hard time. I was focusing on the mantra and I couldn't relax myself enough. And I felt like I was just sitting there saying a mantra. So I just got to think. But then starting with the second train on, my expectations were low. It's like, okay, so obviously it's not going to work for me, but I want to give it a good go because we're talking to Yeda and we want to make sure that I give it a good shot. And something started happening, even though I wasn't completely relaxed. This sounds weird. I got lost in the mantra. Like I got lost where I became one with the words. Like the words came over me and it became like this weird,
it's like tantric. It's almost like yes.
Yeah, it was like I didn't know where I started with and it sounds weird. I know what it sounds like. So please,
but it's supposed to be weird because you're getting back into a vibrational resonation with its resonance with that moment that the universe sang the song that Will was now born. And so wouldn't it make sense that you would get lost in that because it's so simple. I mean, we run around with these little lights and we keep talking to the divine and we're like, but I want to know what it's like to be the light. Well, what's it like to be the light? I mean, well, you already are it. And so we have to have the contrast to experience that which we are, because that's the whole point of being human. So when we get into the spiritual and the metaphysical, it makes so much sense to go, well, of course you got lost in it. It's not weird. That's the true essence of who you are. When we forget and separate and pull back out and get all into this human crap, then we get all, legalistic and logic. And so getting lost in it is awesome.
It was very much like remember Sgt. Pepper's, like the Beatles, like the whole psychedelic. It was like a psychedelic, but without the trippy part of it. Like it was trippy enough, but it was very strange. And then it became like this, remember Schoolhouse Rock with the words are really big, like tall, and you're looking up at them. And it was just a weird trip.
Well, I would say actually the work that I've been doing and the work that you're talking about is you start to tap into the quantum field. Mm-hmm. That next fourth and fifth dimension that's there. We may not see it with our eyes, but that veil that divides us is, it's this thick. It's right there. And we have the capacity as human beings to sit. And when we sit, we inhale, we open up. It's a slight movement at the top of the spine and at the bottom that the inhale breath moves those bones and the exhale pushes them back down. And the actual act of inhaling and exhaling acts as a pump that pumps the cerebral spinal fluid up the spine, around the head and back. So if you tagged one molecule, that little molecule makes a trip around twice in 24 hours. Here's what's really cool. When you're sitting and you're meditating and you're in that space where you're focusing and you're letting your body breathe, and then you just inhale and hold, and then you exhale and release, you put pressure on the pineal gland. And that's the whole gateway into the quantum field. So when I was like, what was happening? I thought I was just sitting there. The biology of what happens in your body and brain when you get to the moment that you just said, it's like, I just got lost. The chemicals that get released in your brain, the ability, the euphoria, your brain can actually create its own benzodiazepines. That is what Xanax is made of.
Mhm.
You have that capacity biologically. But how many of us are shutting up and sitting long enough to even go in that world? It's all right here. And we're running around like, I don't know why I can't get the job I want, or why I can't have the relationship I want. I don't know why I'm stressed out all the time. The magic's all in here. And we don't do anything to cultivate it.
I'm sorry, I got to go back to see. I'll be back.
Okay, good. Oh, you know what? I'm so glad you said this. See what happens then. What we do in the Western world is like, well, if meditating for 10 minutes is good, I'm going to do it for 10 days straight because I'm going to get there faster.
That's
And then the ego gets addicted and says, well, now I'm going to be a meditator. And what happens is we enter into too much logic and now we make it a task and it's a thing to do. And so what I was going to say earlier, when you're like, I was doing it for like 45 minutes, and don't do it for 45 minutes. 20 minutes is your max. That's it. Because you cannot treat silence and mindfulness and meditation like you treat anything else that you're trying to achieve. It is not anything to be achieved or done. It is something to experience and be.
You just opened up my entire morning.
Oh, I can't tell you the people that I meet, and they're like, I read a book and then I do a prayer and then I write out this plan for the day and then I write out my meditation and then I do my meditation, then I have my mantra and then I have and I'm like, oh my God, I'm exhausted. What if you stopped all of that and all you did was just sit down for 20 minutes and asked yourself those 4 soul questions, went and did your mantra. When you're in that mantra space, that's all you're doing. And then when you're done, you put an intention out into the world, because the thought is the intention that goes out. The emotion is what calls it in to manifest. And then you get yourself in the vibrational, emotional state as if it's already here, and you go live your life.
And you, Will, are such a creature of habit. Like everything has to be, he's very regimented. You know, he's very scheduled. My schedule's off, forget it, the whole day's done. And it doesn't have to be that way.
I mean,
Yeah. Because it feels good when we're in control, doesn't it? And being in control is one of the 4 ways that we avoid pain. We either numb it away by, shopping, drinking, you name it. Then the other is we get addicted to personal development. So we create all the to-do list and we read all the books and do all the activities. And metaphysical can fall in there, people. And then number 3 is we look at the story of pain and we write an even worse one. So we get out of the pain and then start imagining the worst pain. And then the last 4th one is we try to control it. And we spend our lives in a massive state of stress because we think we can be the controller of the entire universe, and it's impossible.
You set these goals or expectations for yourself. It's almost like you're setting yourself up to fail because that's kind of what you're used to or you're more comfortable with.
Yeah, it's just a pattern.
Yeah.
What's your practice like, Karen? Do you have a practice of silence and stillness?
It's not anything regular. But I've not really had so meditating took me for a while to kind of really get into it, really enjoy it, but I do. Will and I are a little bit different. He has to be entertained. And, they'll take these long road trips to Florida and, usually we're kind of looking at our phones or he's listening to podcasts. But sometimes I'm just sitting there and he's like, how can you just sit there? And it's fine. You just kind of sit there and be.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to go on a road trip with me, Will, because when I get in the car, I don't listen to anything anymore. I just pay attention to the sound of the tires. I practice my awareness of what's going on right in front of me. And I'm just being in the moment. And so that some people have that more naturally than others, and that's okay. And my boyfriend loves, it's constantly Kenny Chesney. He wants to listen to music every time we get in the car. And sometimes I go, hey, do you mind if we just practice a few minutes of just kind of no noise, maybe just for a couple of minutes? It just helps my brain. And the ADD in my brain loves silence and stillness now, because I literally do believe that I have rewired my brain after a decade of this. I have created new neural pathways. We know the science around this. It is absolutely proven. To change a behavior, repetition works. Most people don't realize, though, repetition is not 21 days. Repetition now is at least 267 days on research to change a behavioral pattern. And that's not a really severe one. So, Will, how old are you? So think about the number of years it took to create the habits and patterns you have. They're not going to go away in 20 minutes. It's not going to go away in 267 days. You get years of laying this neural pathway. But what I love about silence is it gives me the ability to just go within and be this existential detective. And the more I do it, the more I can kind of look at, well, what caused me pain? And before we started the show today, without the details, this situation arose and I found myself, I could feel all of this welling up and all these narratives and all these stories. And I stopped. Thankfully, I have this practice and I closed my eyes and I go, what is the pain point here? And ultimately, the pain point that I had to get in touch with was, I'm not going to get what I thought I was going to get out of this arrangement. Can I be okay with walking away and just letting that be a lesson?
Right.
And not doing the 15 things that the ego is like, you need to do this, you need to do that. She was still there. And so I think when you're in this work, it's also important to remind the listeners and also for you, Will, our ego is always going to be with us. This idea that the ego is the enemy or we have to kill the ego or silence the enemy, the more you do that, the larger the ego is coming at you. And you need to have a really strong ego to be able to shut up and sit down and go within. And the work is to integrate that ego back into helping you do the work, not keep you away from it. And so that was the next part that I learned was I would start talking to that part of myself that's like, I don't want to do this. I need this, or I want to listen to that, or this is so hard, or we need to do. And I would just say, can you just shut up for a minute? And as hard as you're working to tell me all the things that aren't working, can you put your energy into keeping my ass on this cushion for just a couple more minutes? And then she would lean in and go, I can do that because she just needs a job.
I fully understand the importance of just being. I totally get it. I know, and I know I'm bad at it. That's why I understand. The interesting part was that in the depths of my darkness, when I was at my absolute lowest, there was nothing I could do other than just sit. I wasn't interested in watching the shows I was interested in. I wasn't interested in playing the games I used to play. I wasn't interested in reading the news. I wasn't interested in doing anything except just sitting and just being with the pain that I was feeling because I couldn't see a way out of it.
Well, there is no way out of it. The worst quote in the world. The only way through it is through it. And you love your way through it. And you realize the shadow and the darkness is you. It's the parts of you you've hidden away, pushed away, packed away, told don't ever come out again. That's what the ego's job is. And says, don't ever show yourself again, because if you do, you're going to get hurt. So I'm going to take over. And integrating those people and those parts of yourselves back together, it takes a lot of courage. That's where the ego can help you to open those doors back up and say, can we work together? And that liminal space, that darkness, to be able to go into that liminal darkness, that, what they might call God's waiting room, or just this divine space of nothingness, and realize I'm still here, is incredibly powerful. Because when we can touch that and sit with that, and then, I don't know about you all, I'm a prolific dreamer, and I dream all night, every night in Technicolor, as real as we're talking right now. And that's how I think a lot of things come to me. And I remember when I was doing this work, I had this Technicolor dream where I saw the most beautiful life, and it was just this absolute paradise. And I took my hands and I picked them up. And as I touched the image, it was almost like I was playing piano. Now I don't play any instruments. And I started doing this on this screen, if you will, of this image of a life. And every time I touched it, it would make a ripple and it would make the most beautiful sound, and it would create something different. And I remember in this dream thinking, we can create whatever we want. We are the creators here. But I had forgotten that because I'd kind of squashed into this, painful suffering space. But that's what came on the other side of the darkness, was that's right there. And so we have to sit in order to find that. And that's that liminal darkness that you think is never going to end. And the minute you think it's never going to end and you give up and you surrender, what happens? Everything changes. We're all on our own unique healing path and working with things we cannot see and cannot understand. But all I know is we're all doing the same journey, but it is wildly and uniquely different to each of us. And for me, the last decade has been shutting up and sitting and going within and getting so radically aware of who I am that the best thing that happened at the end of all of this is I fell so in love with who I am that it was a game changer for me because I stopped placing expectations on anyone and anything else out there to make me be anything other than who I was.
And I really liked how you say it's not a one size fits all thing. And Will, to something you said earlier, I don't think you're terrible at it. I think you're actually very, very good at it.
At sitting,
Not at sitting and doing nothing, but at having that connection and whether it's through meditating or the retreat you've done, you're really, I mean, you connect and you connect deeply and much more quickly than I think. I think you're judging yourself maybe based on stories you've heard of other people's experiences.
Yeah, no, I can. I can if I allow myself to. But you're right. My expectations are way here, and when I don't hit that, that's when I get disappointed and start going.
But your
And that's
experience is
totally
gonna be
normal.
likely your experience is going to be very different from someone else's. So you might never hit here. You
Well,
might hit over
Yeah.
there.
What I think is important for people who go within and practice any form of silence and stillness, the only thing that's different between me and anyone else who has not done the work of doing the silence and the sitting, I just recover quicker. I still have expectations. I still have self-judgments. I still have value. I have all these things that float around because I still have an ego. The only thing that is different, I am not more enlightened. I say this all the time. I don't believe any of us are enlightened until we all are because we're all connected. So I would never run around and tell someone, I'm enlightened, I'm healed, I'm better than, I'm anything. Because when we already have it, we don't need to talk about it, one. Two, when we get into this space of going within and just doing all of this work, what happens is we just allow ourselves to just be who we already are. And so this narrative and all these things that change and it falls away. And so I'm not trying to attack anything or achieve anything anymore because I'm just so in tune and in love with being it that it just feels good. And you mentioned something a minute ago about going on a retreat. Karen said, did you go on a retreat, Will?
I did. Yep.
Yeah. So I did a 7-day silent retreat. I had to for one of my certifications because I'm the person that's like, okay, well, if I'm going to learn about meditation and mindfulness, I want to go do a 2-year certification in each because I need to know what I'm talking about. And it was really only for my benefit. I do not view myself as a meditation or a mindfulness teacher. And so they say you're going to have to do a 2-week meditation. I mean, a 1-week silent meditation. Now I'd done a weekend, and I'm very into aesthetics. So when I talk about a retreat, I go to a nice place, nice food, nice, scenery. And I'd done a couple and I'm like, oh, I've done 2 days. I can do 7. And so the people who are teaching it, they're doing like some kind of 7-day silent retreat. And it's like at a campground. Like, I don't even know what state. I tuned out when I heard campground. And so I was like, oh, I don't think I can make that work with my work schedule. I'm going to have to find something different. So I send in an email and I'm like, there's 1,700 people in this course. I'm like, I have some work stuff. I just can't do it this summer. Is there any way I could be given a special permission to find another 7-day silent retreat and go attend that? Yeah. So already ego. And so they're like, well, if you could find one. And so I start searching and I find this fabulous place in Denver. And it's an ashram. It's outside of Denver, like 2 hours. And the teachers are teaching the mindfulness-based stress reduction 7-day silent retreat. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's all me. Stress reduction, mindfulness-based, ashram, like check. Yep, first class to Denver. Yep, they're going to pick me up. I literally, no lie, you all, I get off the plane. I have my little Toomey luggage. Everything's like on point. I've got the cutest little hiking clothes because I'm going to be out in the mountain and I'm going within and I've got it all figured out. And we get on this little van or bus or whatever, and we just keep going for 2 hours and we get there and it's muddy. It's been snowing and he like is at the top of the hill and he's like this long walk through the mud and snow to get down to the lodge. And I'm like, if I give you an extra $20, do you think you could just go a little bit further? I mean, so I get there. And the point of telling you this story is I'm thinking, I'm just here to check a box. I got to get this certification done. I get there, I get all checked in and I go into this beautiful, it's just this gorgeous, it looks like something in like Asia, this beautiful room that overlooks this garden. They got the little meditation cushions are all set around. The teachers are in the front. There's a gong. And I'm like, yeah, this is good. And so I go to sit down and this is where metaphysics comes in. And yes, I'm going somewhere with this story. So there's like 30 cushions and I'm always the person that takes the back left seat. So I'm all the way in the back, in the left, and I can see everything that's going on, and I'm by the door. Just my trauma wiring. So I'm like, okay, I got my spot. And in walks the brunette version of Brad Pitt. And he comes behind me. He comes to the right of me, takes his cushion and goes to the other side of me. Now he's the far left. He's on my left now. And I'm like, what is this dude doing? And then I look at him and I'm like, oh my God, he is so gorgeous. And then I'm like, oh, really funny. Great. And talking to the angels. I'm like, so now I'm sitting for 7 days in silence next to the hottest man on the planet. And I can't talk to him.
I'm sorry. I was not there. So you could not.
And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, you got to be kidding. This is a joke. I am in the most amazing place in the world. And so my point in this was all of a sudden, I just start realizing all this is running. And I'm like, okay, you got a week of this. So I thought I was just going to zoom and zip right through this 7 days. And I thought I had my pen, my journal, like I was going all into like a seminar. And the guy in the front says, turn to the person to your left and get to know them. You've got 10 minutes because this is the last time you will make eye contact with another human being, speak, read, write, anything for the next 7 days.
Hey, quick, what's your phone number?
Yeah. Well, I just asked him, was he single? And he said no. And I'm like, oh, okay. So we started this nice little dialogue, but here's my point was 7 days of silence. I got into day 3. Well, actually, let me back up. The first night I went back to my room and I played Pavarotti's Miserere as loud as I could and opened the windows to the desert and belted it out because I was like, I got to get it out. I come back the next morning, 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. 6 solid days. By day 3, I was fantasizing about taking the gong stick and beating the instructor to like a bloody death. I mean, literally. Wow. I went into the upside down world of Stranger Things in my own psyche. And then when we get to the end of the week, we get a chance to engage with the instructor. And I'm out of my mind. There's no Wi-Fi. There's no car. I went all the way to the bottom. And when we were done, and then something beautiful just broke open. And so at the end, he said, does anybody want to share their thoughts? And I shared my thoughts. I said, I had fantasies of like harming you. I mean, I was all in on like beating you and fantasizing how I was going to get a ride out of here. And he said, that's great. And I'm like, no, I'm judging myself. This is bad. I'm a bad person. And he said, do you know the entire lesson that you learned this week? And I go, what? And he goes, it's the greatest lesson that all Americans need to learn. It is the lesson of boredom. And I went, oh. And he goes, now that you've done this for 7 days, when you go home and sit for 20 minutes, it's going to feel like 5 seconds. And what's going to happen is you've rewired this ability to be able to be bored. Nothing. Because I was freaking out. What do you mean I can't write? I've got to retain what I learn. And he goes, trust your brain. If it's still there in a week and you need it, you'll recall it. And so when we get into self-judgment, when we go into, all of these narratives, the value of doing silence and starting small, you all, but continually adding is we do build a new way of showing up. And I stopped judging myself and I started having the most wonderful dialogues and asking source questions in my practice in that 7 days. And I got answers that blew my mind. I would have never gotten there if I didn't go through that dark, piece of me that was like, anger and rage. And I mean, the instructor told me, he goes, I watched you unravel before my very eyes sitting on that cushion. I mean, I would be like, hey. I mean, like a 3-year-old, and I'd be like throwing my arms and crossing, and I'm like, waiting for the gong, whatever, and running out of the room. And he goes, I watched your very psyche dissolve and come back together as something new in a matter of a week. So we can go into the long meditation retreats if we want to, but I think it's a lot easier for us as human beings to just grab 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and let that be enough. And if we cultivate enoughness and we're okay with being bored, we might find that there's actually something else underneath that we can touch and that we can live with and be with, because we're just addicted to distraction.
Yeah.
Well, now if someone wanted to do silence or primordial sounds, how can someone get a mantra? Because they're not handed out willy-nilly.
It is very, very, very science oriented. I need, your name, your place of birth, the time, the date, latitude, longitude is figured out by the, city, state, and country. I plug all that into a very high level software system that's given to me through the Chopra Center. And then I get back that mantra and then I send that to a client. And so, so you have to work with a certified primordial sound instructor in order to get it.
So if anyone's listening to this show right now, could they reach out to you? Get that?
Yeah, it's all on my website. They can reach out and set up a little clarity call is what I call it. And then we just talk about what that looks like. And I love it. It's not something that I do as a meditation teacher, but I like the idea of educating people what it is and how it works. And so I don't sit with people and just do meditation. My brain is like, the ADD brain. And sometimes I want to get into therapy and sometimes I want to get into coaching and sometimes I want to get into mindset and sometimes I want to get into behaviors. So I don't want to be quiet all the time when I'm with clients, but I like being quiet when I'm with me. I'll leave the listeners with what I learned in all of this work was the client is the moment. The client is the moment. And so from a metaphysical perspective, if we can serve the moment and ask the moment what it wants, that's where all divine intelligence exists. I don't think we ever fall out of love. I don't think it's all falling out of presence. And when we disconnect from a conscious, powerful present moment, we disconnect from everything that's not seen and not heard and, in this physical body that is communicating with us at all times. And so when I did this work with the Moment Institute, I remember the founder, David Drake, saying, the moment is the client. You are here to ask the moment what it most wants and needs, not your own ego, not Will's, not Karen's, not even the listeners. What does the moment most want and need right now? And that's what I feel like I learned to do when I learned to shut up and sit. So any situation I'm in now with clients or with family or friends, I pause and I just quietly ask, what does the moment most want and need? And my spirit guides and the divine intelligence that's in and around all of us starts to come in. And then it's just a knowingness for me. There's no audible, I just know. And I know what that feels like. And I sit up 3 inches taller and I go, oh, okay. And then I will invite that into the space. And then people will say, how did you do that? How did you? And I'm like, just had a feeling. Just kind of knew maybe that might be a good idea, but I didn't. It wasn't me. It was the magic of the moment working through me at a very profound metaphysical level. And it just showed up as me.
It's a beautiful way of looking at it. Right? This has been wonderful. We're going to add all your links to our show notes. So if you want to get in contact with Yeda, all you need to do is go to skepticmetaphysician.com, look at our episode page, and you'll find all the links they lead in. So you could just click the link and you'll get connected with her.
It's been a lot of fun to hang out and talk with you all and answer questions and share whatever wisdom is coming through me that is experiencing itself as you, experiencing itself as me. Yeah, try that one on for a little bit, right?
That's one of the timey-wimey things that makes your mind just explode sometimes. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing your wisdom with us.
And a huge thank you to you. If you know someone who would benefit from hearing the message we're sharing on the show, do them and us a favor and share the show with them. It will help get the word out about us, and it might just change someone's life for the better. Well, that's all for now, but we'll see you on the next episode of The Skeptic Metaphysician. Until then, take care.